My name is Rob Steer, and tonight's event is the culmination of more than 6 months' work by a team of passionate, dedicated, caring, and incredibly hardworking people. Tonight we are launching Voices for Nicholls, an organisation bringing together members of the Nicholls community to advocate for their collective needs, wants, and expectations. Regardless of your politics or who you vote for, we want to hear your opinions and ideas for making Nicholls a wonderful place to live for generations to come. On to the format for tonight. We are very lucky to have Cathy McGowan and Dr. John Hewson joining us tonight. In a few moments' time, we will hear them interviewed on a range of subjects by a very talented journalist and political enthusiast, Shepparton's own Caitlin Cassidy. At the conclusion of the interview, we will have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience. You are invited to write these in the chat, and we will have Caitlin ask Cathy and John on your behalf. We will finish the formalities with an update on what is happening next for Voices for Nicholls and how you can take part. But before we hear from our guests, we are honoured to have a very special acknowledgement of country. Aboriginal elder Auntie Pam Peterson sets a shining example for all through her dedicated work in the Koori court system, her active involvement in many Aboriginal organisations, and her remarkable sporting achievements. Auntie Pam is the youngest daughter of Pastor Sir Douglas and Lady Gladys Nicholls, for whom our electorate is named.
Good evening, and thank you, Rob. It is my pleasure to do the Welcome to Country on this beautiful land of ours with our lovely pastures and the Dungala River, which you all may know as the Murray River, and the surrounding of many, many gum trees, and of course, the people. I would now like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our lands on which we stand, and I pay my respect to our elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you to Voices for Nicholls for all of your efforts so far, and congratulations on the launch of your organisation today. I hope everyone in the Nicholls electorate is encouraged to join a kitchen table conversation for a yarn sometime over the next few months. Thank you and have a good evening.
We'd like to thank Auntie Pam for that warm welcome. It is now my honour to introduce tonight's special guests. Cathy McGowan was the independent member for the North East Victorian seat of Indi from 2013 until her retirement in 2019. During her time in Parliament, Cathy's work focused on developing policy for regional development and drought, as well as a politician code of conduct and a National Integrity Commission. Since leaving politics, Cathy continues to reside in Indi and spends a great deal of her time supporting communities across Australia to become involved in community-based politics. Cathy was appointed Officer of the Order of Australia in 2004 for her service to the community through raising awareness of and stimulating debate about issues affecting women in regional, rural, and remote areas. Dr. John Hewson served as the member for Inner Sydney seat of Wentworth from 1987 until 1995. In that time, he served as Shadow Finance Minister, Shadow Treasurer, Shadow Minister for Industry and Commerce, and most notably, as leader of the Liberal Party and Federal Coalition in opposition from 1990 to 1994. John is an economic and financial expert who has split his time since leaving Parliament as an academic, economist, and champion of sustainable finance initiatives. John was awarded Member of the Order of Australia in 2001 for service to business and economics. Please welcome Cathy, John, and Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Rob, and how special I think to have that acknowledgement for country from Auntie Pam. I think in many ways it's quite fitting to have a Zoom event such as this when we're all in the midst of lockdown and have virtually no reason to leave the house. So it is really wonderful to be here tonight and to have something to do, but I'm also just really excited to speak with John and Cathy. I think it's been such a tumultuous time this year and last year for many reasons, but I think before we dive into that, I'd love to go back perhaps to start off with you, Cathy, in 2013. So you had just obviously won the federal seat of Indi. I think it was the first time it was taken from a Conservative MP since 1931. So I suppose keeping that statistic in mind, were you surprised to win?
We were very surprised to win and absolutely delighted. And one of the things about this tonight is you never know if you don't have a go. And everyone can say, it's never going to work. It's all too hard. It's all a Conservative seat. You know, the National Party will never support you, or the Libs will never vote, or you won't get the preferences. And we listened to all that chatter in our community, and I suppose we believed half of it. So when we actually got elected, it was on the night of the election. We actually, even though the recount had to happen, and it took us, I think, 18 days or whatever, 10 days to get the final vote. But on the night out, when we all got together in the Wangaratta Town Hall, 600, 700 of us in our orange, we'd actually won that night, even though we didn't know the final result of whatever. But we'd won because we'd been our best selves, because we'd created this really wonderful opportunity for people to engage in politics. We'd created networks that had never existed before. And we'd taken so many people who were cynical and disillusioned with politics in our community in Wangaratta and Wodonga and Mansfield, and we'd given them a chance to actually make it better. So we were surprised that that had worked, but we were getting the feel. But the really wonderful thing about what we're undertaking and talking about tonight and launching is you never know what the outcomes, and there'll be many, will be. And while I certainly hope that you can run an independent and make the seat, the federal seat, an independent seat, the very fact that you're getting together, the community's getting together, and you're talking about these really important issues will make a change. So yeah, there's lots of different ways where you can win. It doesn't only have to be, getting across the line with 439 votes.
And of course, I mean, when Voices for Indi kicked off, you weren't initially, the candidate, you weren't the front runner. So I suppose what provoked you to actually run in the first place?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that went through my head. I was very happy to be the leader, to be the convener of Voices for Indi, as long as it wasn't going to be me, because I was really happy in my life. But that changed as the whole system got underway. And there was so much support from the community that they wanted to run an independent. And then lots of people said, well, why not you? And I sort of got worn down by saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm already involved in everything else. I'm really busy. Don't worry me. I'm not going to be a politician. And the people who particularly wore me down were the young people who basically called me out. And I'm saying tonight to our leaders, the young people of Indi said, Cathy, well, you talk about leadership and you talk about getting involved and you're not prepared to step up. And I'd say, yeah, I've got all these reasons. And they say, yep, well, if not you, who? If you're not going to do it, who's going to do it? And if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? When you're 82? So that the young people calling me to step up into truly leadership position. And it's true that I got to be the candidate, but right across the electorate, so many other people were called to be leaders. So I think that's the magic of the Voices for movement, is it doesn't just have one leader. Sure, I was the candidate, but I was only able to do what I did because 600-700 other people all took leadership roles. And once we got underway with the campaign, I think when we would meet in Wangaratta on those Monday nights, there'd be often 30 people in the room, all who'd taken responsibility for different parts of the campaign. So there was a huge number of people who were really courageous and stepped up. And I think that's what made it possible for me was I was surrounded by all my colleagues and friends and neighbours, and we all moved into that space together. It wasn't that I had to do it by myself.
And I think it's interesting, and maybe it would be good to get your perspective on this too, John, but you've spoken a lot about, I think, the pragmatics of just getting things done. And these bread and butter issues and really pushing hard on these bread and butter issues in your electorate. I think, how much do you think, I suppose, that contributed to your success? And should politicians be paying more attention to the bread and butter issues?
Well, I think so. I mean, I can never forget when I first started as a candidate for the seat of Wentworth. I went door knocking on a Sunday morning down a couple of streets in Paddington. at the end of the street, I pulled my team together. We worked both sides of the street and so on. Pulled my team together and I said, well, I had about 25 issues that people were concerned about, and I'm not sure how we're going to actually represent all 25. And the other one said, well, I had 10 more. And there are a lot of issues and people didn't feel engaged. And I think one of the secrets of the independent movements is that people are sick and tired of their representatives not representing their interests, not spending the time with the community, not trying to understand the significance of the issues. Of course, they're worried about the big national issues and they want their views reflected on those issues. But when they see their local member not listening to their position, and you've seen it so many times. I mean, a conspicuous example, very conspicuous example, was the postal vote for the same-sex marriage bill. The National Party assumed that they'd get a majority of their seats easily voting no. And they got 15 to 16 seats voting yes, and some of them very significantly. And it just was a clear demonstration you don't know what your electorate thinks is important or what positions you should take. And I think that mood is now growing quite significantly in a number of seats where members of parliament seem to be looking after themselves or servicing their mates in terms of the policy initiatives, not governing in the national interest and certainly not reflecting the local issues. And a lot of those local issues are bread and butter issues. People are struggling with the cost of living, basic stuff, you know, and they want to get a house, they want to educate their kids, they want to, you know, be secure in their job, they want to be able to, you know, just enjoy a level of living, which they're finding very difficult. And of course, the pandemic hasn't helped that. It's been another layer of difficulty.
And it's interesting you bring up the same-sex marriage vote, because I think perhaps that reflects maybe in some ways our government is more conservative on a lot of issues than the public is, than the public consensus. And you can look at an issue like climate change.
Well, that's right. I mean, they don't listen. I think the Morrison government has a tin ear on climate. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that they should be acting now. The cost of inaction is swamping. Cost of bushfires and floods and extreme weather events, for example, are enormous and running away. In a few years' time, as ANU and University of Melbourne has estimated, you'll be having the equivalent of a pandemic recession every year as a result of not adjusting properly to climate change. And, you know, most of the major groups across Australia, whether they're business groups or civil society groups or households or a range of institutions and representative bodies, they're all on side. They're all saying we want decisive government-led action. And here's the government sitting there still in a mode of denial. And, you know, the time is of the essence here. You don't have a lot of time to play around. You're going to get to net zero by 2050, which the world seems to be adopting as a target. We are miles short of that. And the adjustment process gets harder and more disruptive as every year goes by. Yet it could be a positive. It could create lots of jobs, billions of dollars of investment and growth. It's hard to believe that the leadership of the party, both parties are, you know, Liberal and Labor are really divided on this issue, which is staggering. I've been involved in the debate for over 30 years and I can't believe we haven't made any net progress.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Cathy, do you agree? Do you think maybe the assumption of rusted on voters and safe seats needs to be reconsidered?
I have to say it wasn't my experience. What we found in Indi was that people wanted a choice that wasn't the mainstream parties. Not everybody, but there are a lot of people who are just sick of getting somebody else do the nominations and predetermine who the candidate would be. And then whether you're National Party or Liberal, which is basically what Indi was, they just had to vote for somebody that they didn't even, you know or like. So the parties somewhere just dobbed people in. So people wanted a choice. But one of the magic things that we found in Indi, which really surprised me, so it's a bit different to Nicholls, but we had a Liberal MP. And what we found that the Nationals responded really well to the argument that they could vote 1 independent and 2 Liberal as their way of saying, well, we would really much rather vote for our team, which was the Nats. So I got all those first preferences. And when we had the scrutineers come through, they saw lots and lots of votes. Did 1 Cathy McGowan, 2 Sophie. But the thing is, once I got those first votes, I was able to hold on to them.
Sure.
And the other thing about being rusted on is there was a whole swag of Liberal people who just wanted to let their government know that they weren't happy with the way the government was governing. So they would vote one Cathy to Sophie. And that was just their way of being, even though they were still loyal, I suppose, if you want, to the Liberal, the National Party, they wanted to send a message. And for the other side, if we talked about Labor, and there were about 8% of Indi was Green voting, they were very happy to vote one Green candidate or one Labor, and then put me as their second preference. So when we were able to harvest all those votes. So what I found is that while people might be rusted on, they're also very pragmatic, and they absolutely get where their own best interests lie. And so they were really happy to vote for me, one, because they wanted just to be, be feisty and independent, and just not always have to do what the parties told you to do, because the parties very rarely had like Northeast Victoria, or for you in Northern Victoria, they very rarely had our interests at heart. So, for example, and I'll just finish on this, the Liberals always did city things. They just didn't get rural and regional Australia. I mean, they said the words, but they never got us. Like, our mobile phone coverage was terrible. Our internet was really bad. And so that was, and even I think about Labor, like Labor talks about country, but it doesn't do stuff for us. And the Nats, I mean, they were the worst of all, because they had no, if you do a Google search for the National Party regional development policy, it doesn't exist. All they've got is a grant, apply for money and we'll give you a grant. They've got no vision for the country. And it's particularly bad at the moment because the Nats are sort of all run by Queensland. So when we talk about rusted on, in Indi, people got their own best interest, and they said, I'm just going to tell them, I might vote 2 for them, but I'm just going to put a shot across their bows, and yep, Cathy, you're a nice enough person, I'll vote for you.
Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, look, I think the element of a protest vote is very important in looking at an independent candidate. I mean, I think the major parties do tend to take their votes for granted. I sort of proved that point in the Wentworth by-election, when Turnbull was removed and forced a by-election. I made the statement, I was in the ABC on the day it was announced, and I said, look, a strong independent candidate that runs mostly on climate will win this seat. And everyone laughed, Anthony Green, that goes, there's a 17.5% margin, it's inconceivable. Yet Karen Phelps stood, and she ran principally on, she got benefit of the protest vote against, in the circumstances in which Turnbull was removed. She ran on climate, a little bit on refugees, never swayed from the message, and won that seat against a 17.5% swing by another 1,800 votes. So, it's silly for a sitting candidate, even in a safe seat, to take it for granted that people are just going to continue to turn up and vote for them. And taking the vote for granted has been a mistake, I think, on both sides of both the major parties for quite some time. And you're starting to see the protest movements gain momentum on issues, or on the fact that there hasn't been a reflection of local concerns and local engagement. So a number of factors come together to bring the result of an independent rising through. I mean, they're helped by the fact that the sitting member, in the case of Sophie Mirabella, or Tony Abbott in the case of Zali Steggall, I mean, they didn't help themselves. But having said that, I mean, the mood is there for protest. And as Cathy said, vote one independent. Then you can have your choice for the second preference. And it will make a big difference, and it will send a clear message. And I think in the circumstances of today, where there is a lot of concern about where we're going, no vision beyond the next election. The government's vision runs out at the next election. Everything is looked at through the prism of winning the next election or retaining government. And people are saying, yeah, but all the big issues are not being dealt with. I mean, and you can see them every day. It's not just climate. Things like aged care and childcare, mental illness, domestic violence, a host of issues where there has been an inadequate or no response. And over time, I mean, people are going to start reflecting that in the ballot box.
But I mean, if you look at, recent issues of sports rorts, the car park scandal, I mean, clearly safe seats aren't getting all of these responses. It's the marginal seats that are getting this. So what is the way, really, if you want to turn a safe seat marginal, apart from backing an independent candidate?
It really isn't, you know, you might, within the major parties, they may encourage an alternative person to stand as the ownership of the seat changes and so on, but independents have got the opportunity to make these points. And, you know, in things like sports rorts and all the other rorts, I mean, billions of dollars of wasted money. And, you know, we can't bring people back from overseas, but we can fund Matthias Cormann to go to a string of countries at about $11,000 a flight. You know, this really grates with people. It doesn't pass the pub test. And so in those circumstances, I think an independent can carry a lot of weight in terms of representing those issues. And in the end, something like sports rorts or the accountability in government, the lack of trust in government, the accountability that's been lost, has to come at the ballot box. I mean, they deny the Auditor General's reports, they duck the scrutiny from the Senate estimates process, they don't answer questions or provide detail. So in those circumstances, I mean, the ballot box is the ultimate arbiter.
I suppose then on the other side, maybe you might have a response to this, Cathy. How effective, once you're in, can an independent really be if you're not in a hung parliament?
Oh, I love this question. Oh, because that was the line the Liberals would always throw at me. Oh, you can't do anything. You don't sit at the table. What can you do? And in the last newsletter that Helen Haynes has put out across the electorate, Helen Haynes talks about sitting at the table, and she's sitting photo of her with the Prime Minister, then with the Treasurer, and then with the Minister for Health. And then she talks about all the other ministers that she's been there, because she gets access and she gets amazing things done. So that's just the way it is. But the really interesting point that you make, Caitlin, is about being able to use your vote. The thing that makes an independent so good for an electorate is the electorate can actually believe that every single vote that you make in Parliament is a conscience vote. You've read the legislation, you know what it's about. And if you look at Helen Haynes and Zali Steggall's webpage, every vote that they take, they put it up on the webpage and they say why they've done it. Whereas if you're member of Parliament, and I would say often when I was in Parliament, the party people, they've got a little pager and it says, yep, vote for this or don't vote for this. And I'd go into Parliament and I'd say to them, you know, do you know what you're voting on? And they go, nah. Really? And it never happened to the crossbench, or never happened to an independent, because we were across everything. Whereas the party people, they're just foot soldiers and they do exactly what they're told. And you can see it with this climate change debate we're having at the moment. So when people vote for an independent, they know that their community is holding that person to account. When you vote for a party member, not so. Because the first allegiance of a party member is to their party, and they've got to do what the party says. And I have to say, we'll talk about Julia Banks, but look at the trouble she got into when she tried to buck her party. But not only do they have to vote for the party, but I feel so sorry for the people in parties, because then the funders of the parties really pull the strings. So your poor old member of a party has got to face off to their party members first, and then they've got to face off to all the funders. So they've got no chance to actually make a conscience vote or represent their community. So every time people says, what can an independent do? I say, well, number one, they actually do their job, represent their community. And two, it's got nothing to do with a hung parliament. It's got everything to do with absolutely the passion and the commitment of going to Parliament, like Zali Steggall, what she's done on climate change, what Helen Haynes has done on integrity, what Andrew Wilkie is doing about holding the gambling industry to account. So just for example, those three members of Parliament single-handedly have changed the whole way politics works. So it's not what you can do, it's just imagine if we had a few more on the crossbench, a few more independents of quality and calibre. Imagine what we could do with water if we had a really good representative in Parliament from Nicholls, from Shepparton and Echuca, who actually represented the constituency about water. Imagine what we could do about the Murray-Darling Basin. Imagine what we could do about manufacturing if we actually had representatives there. Oh, so it makes my heart sing at the possibility, and it makes my eyes cry when I see party members just doing what they're told and representing somebody else, nothing to do with their electorates.
I really like that you mentioned Julia Banks, because I've actually got a quote that I'd like to put to, well, both of you really, but in her recent memoir, she called the Liberal Party a broad church where the moderate voices had been drowned out. And I quote this part: "The party is firmly a Christian, conservative, right-wing party. My vision is that a minority government with moderate, progressive, sensible, centrist independents holding the balance of power will be the only circuit breaker to the paralysis and political football the major parties have created." I suppose, John, do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, look, for a long time I've argued that, as Howard used to say time and time again, that the Liberal Party is a broad church. And that, in a sense, is true in terms of the mixture of membership. And having been a small L Liberal in a large L Liberal party, I probably felt it a bit more than others. But having watched the way they perform, they always govern to the right-hand side of the pulpit. The left and centre-left doesn't get the influence on policy, position, structure, and so on that the community would expect if they were getting fair representation. And so this bias to the right, and the hard right, of course, believe you can win elections by taking extreme right-wing positions, yet they're not consistent. I mean, if you were a genuine conservative, a very hardline conservative, believes in small government, believes in low levels of regulation, believes in using market forces wherever you can, you'd immediately put a price on carbon and start working towards the climate resolution. No, that doesn't fit that extreme disruptive position that they like to take. But it is consistent with what they would claim to be their philosophical position. So I don't like these labels anymore, left, right, or or whatever. They're not left-right issues. They're issues that need to be judged in the national interest. We need to be able to step outside donors and step away from party organisation and influence. And I think it's possible that you will get a number of independents that will stand and win at the next election, even perhaps have the balance of power in both houses. And that would be a different world along Cathy's lines. I mean, if they were there as a loose alliance saying, look, if it's good government, if you're putting up legislation that is consistent with good government, we'll back it. If not, we won't, don't bother, don't put it up because we're not going to support it. That would change the nature of government dramatically. And I think that's where the system is heading. The US showed an example of discontent with the administration of government over many years under both parties. Trump wasn't the answer. I mean, he got the right issue, but he wasn't the answer. I think in Australia we have the potential now to provide an answer, which over time will bring the protest voice forward, will bring constructive government forward. And, it should be their principal responsibility is good government in the interests of the nation. And that gets lost in all these party structures and sort of voting structures that Cathy refers to. It's true, so many don't understand the detail of the legislation. I remember when they were doing the native title legislation in the Senate, people were sitting there crying, not knowing what the hell they were voting for, procedure after procedure. And this is really a sad set of circumstances.
So where would you project to see that happen, the independence?
Sorry?
Where would you project to see that happen with independence?
Well, look, I think there are a lot of these voices movements now in a lot of seats, probably nearly 40 seats, I think, on a rough count. I mean, the difficulty is to find a good independent candidate in the circumstances of each seat, and each seat is different. I don't think there's one cookie cutter solution to this, but in principle, a good, strong, independent, locally based candidate with a good reputation, obviously in tune with the electorate, but capable of contributing at the national level. They're not easy to find, but I think a few of those are going to stand and they will make a point. And you only really need a handful more and you've got the balance of power. And in those circumstances, a loose alliance amongst them on the big issues, on the good government issues, they could change the face of politics in this country.
I'm interested, maybe, Cathy, the Voices for movement has grown to, I think there's about 31 groups across Australia. Do you agree that they could become a major player? And why do you think it's taking off at the moment in the way that it is?
So I really think the time for independence is now. It really is now. We've got a very weak government. We've got an opposition that's sort of in hiding, and we've got these massive issues that the country's facing. So the timing is right. And issues like integrity and some of those things that John mentioned, like people right across the country are going, ooh, look, this is not good. And I think they're hearing that thing in their head, is that it's the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And Australia, we're not that sort of country. We actually are better than this. So if we are going to be better than this, I think right around the country, so many people are saying, oh my God, look, we really better step up, because we just can't leave it to these parties. They're not good enough. So I think that's the movement, that's the mood. And I absolutely believe it. I think the timing is right. And I haven't got John's sense of how, it's not so difficult, John, I don't think, to find candidates. Because I'll just speak from my own personal experience. Like, I became a good politician. I didn't start out being that way. You know, I worked at it, but it was my community that gave me the strength. And by listening to the community, I became better. And they would tell me, well, you're not good enough. You know, you've got to, you know, you mucked that speech up, or you did something wrong, or whatever you did. And I go, oh yeah, that's right. So I've got to be better. So the time makes the person, or, you know, the position. There's a lovely saying about the circumstances bring forth the leader. And I think I became the leader. I grew into becoming a leader. I certainly wasn't there to start with.
You're a natural, Cathy.
And there was some chat in the side about, do you need to be an AFL player? Well, no. Clearly, I wasn't any of that, but I was well known. I had an extended family. But the real, I'll come back to your question too, but I just want to talk about the candidate thing. The thing that worked for me was that I wasn't like that. You know, I wasn't out there high flyer. I was a good community person. But what got me elected was that 1 in 4, it was the third party endorsement. It was 1 in 4 of the whole electorate changed their vote. And they didn't actually change their vote because of Cathy McGowan. They changed their vote because they wanted something better, but because also a neighbour or a friend or a colleague had said, I'm voting independent this time. I'm going to give my number 1 vote to, you know, Cathy McGowan. And I know somebody who knows her. But really, it was the third party endorsement. It was the community leaders. It was the farmers. It was all the young people who got behind and said, we want something better, and the way to do it is doing this. And so that's what actually got me elected. And then I think I grew into the role. But Caitlin, back to your thing about this national movement. So what I see is happening around Australia is the circumstances are dire, like, for example, with climate change. So we've got to do something, and neither of the parties are going to be the answer to that. And then I think people who are paying attention, they look at Indi and they see, not only did I get elected, but the community liked it enough, they liked the model enough, that they then voted for Helen Haines. And then they listen and they see Helen Haines on TV and they see what a fantastic performer she is and how good she is. And they say, gosh, I want some of that. And then they look at Zali and listen to Zali talk about climate and see that, you know, just hear her talk and they go, yeah, she's a really good member of parliament. So I think the proof is in the pudding. You know, the Andrew Wilkes, the Rebecca Sharkeys, the Karen Phelps, people are saying, well, they're the sort of member of parliament that I want. I'm pretty unhappy with what I've got. And even if they're not an obnoxious person, like lots of the members of parliament are quite nice blokes. I mean, they could be even good blokes, but they all vote the same. So whether or not they're a good bloke or a nice bloke, the fact that they all vote the same and they don't vote for you, I think everyone's just catching on to that. And they're saying, gosh, we could have it better. Let's see if we can get a choice. And I think that's what's happening with this Voices for movement. People are going, okay, well, how do we do it? And I know Dennis Ginnivan's online tonight. So hi, Den. So Dennis has been out there talking to people, talking to them about how they get going, and people are talking to each other and sharing ideas and building this sort of national community about community politics. And it's fun. It gives people courage. It makes you feel better. So why wouldn't you be involved? Like, there's no downside to this. It's all positive.
Would you agree with that, John? Do you think it is that idea that there is a choice?
Yes, I think people are looking for a choice. I mean, there's a natural tendency, I think, to be cautious about changing, you know, from the horse, you know, to the, you know, horse you don't know, or the jockey you don't know. But I think the mood is such now that why not give it a go? And if there's a momentum that builds out of this process, I think it's going to be a very significant force at the next election. It's not always easy to do. I mean, in the last election, for example, Frydenberg was challenged by Oliver Yates and Julian Burnside. So two high-profile main candidates really weren't going to beat him. They split the vote, and it debates the effectiveness of the alternative. But a good, strong candidate running on some of those issues of concern, and Frydenberg carries a fair responsibility for a lot of the issues that do worry people, then I think you can see how effective that argument, that protest vote can be in support of a different approach to government. And that's really where we've got to be.
And there is a Voices for Kooyong movement, I believe.
Well, there are voices movements in a lot of seats which are struggling in some cases to find the right candidate. But the mood is there, and this is why I agree with Cathy that the time is right for this momentum to really build now through to the next election. And governments can't keep ducking responsibility for what's happened. And as if they can walk away, they're above the rule of law. They're not accountable to anybody. They don't have to justify why they wasted all that money on sports rorts or car park rorts or a host of other rorts. People are saying it at the same time. You really haven't done enough on domestic violence support. You haven't done enough on aged care, for example, which is you have a Royal Commission. Its first report refers to neglect. This is decades of neglect by politics, by parties of both sides. One other point I'd make, though, is within this movement, you have to get a lot more women coming into Parliament. I mean, too many men in suits in too many powerful positions over too many years. And you're seeing that manifest itself in so many ways, not just in the way individuals are treated, which is appalling in many cases, but in the policies that they think are important and their interpretation of those policies. We'd have a different world if they take the other extreme. Just imagine Parliament was just full of women. I can't imagine we would have seen a drift in childcare or aged care or mental illness or climate the way we've seen that drift. And so part of the movement is to get more women into Parliament. I've been an ambassador for Women for Election in Australia. I tried in the early 90s to recognise that the system discriminated against women in a serious way. So we started training and offering encouragement, picking candidates, helping them supporting them in. And by 96, we had the biggest influx of women in the Liberal Party than we'd ever had. And then, of course, it waned under Howard and the others that came through. But this is a change that has to take place, and it should be encouraged. Yet there's such a resistance. It's just one of those things you don't talk about, but it has a big impact on where we are as a country, has had a big impact over a long time. And I think part of the independence movement is now looking to bring more qualified, experienced women of a diverse range of experiences to change the balance of the thinking, which I think it makes it a lot harder to impose the sort of discipline you've seen in parties on both sides over so many years, when people want to be heard because they have an opinion, they have a view, and they have a different view from what the party's trying to push them to support.
And it is quite fascinating how many independents are women. Now, I'm conscious of the time, but I do, before sort of discussing how we, encourage political engagement going forward, want to touch on, John, 9 newspapers recently terminated your regular column in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Now, you did tweet, neither the Morrison government nor MSM actually believe in free press, not controlled or restricted by government. I'm just interested maybe to get your perspective on what you think this spells for the future of Nine.
Well, look, I think that the mainstream media has really lost its influence. Obviously, technology's played a big part in that, and the proliferation of news platforms and other sources of information. I mean, generations of younger people don't bother to read newspapers anymore. They may look at the online version, but they don't read the print version. And, they're running particular strategies. And I find that a lot of the mainstream media takes a position, we must be basically supportive of the government. We must be able to excuse them. Don't ask them too many difficult questions. Don't hold them to account. That is a really big failing in the system, in the media. When you've got two big groups like the Murdoch Empire and the Nine Entertainment Empire, which is not just television in the case, but radio and print, it's a very different world. I mean, when Nine took over Fairfax, there were all sorts of commitments made about how they'd maintain the integrity of the Fairfax brand and the investigative reporting and the quality of journalism for which Fairfax had been known for decades. And suddenly Nine is just not a news service anymore. It's basically more an entertainment company than it is a news service that brings informed debate forward and is interested in informed debate. Look, I'm not putting my own case, and it was only a matter of time they got rid of somebody like me. But, I do think that in the circumstances, we need to have people. One of the things the internet has allowed is that people have opinions, and you get those opinions. They express them. They feel that they're equally capable of expressing their opinions as a commentator or anybody else. And they don't like to be force-fed with a particular point of view. And that's particularly true of young people. I've got a 17-year-old daughter who's very definitive in her views. She knows what's wrong with the world and she knows how to fix it. She's bloody well going to do it. And that element is very significant. And we shouldn't downplay the significance of that. I mean, the mockery that was directed at Greta Thunberg on climate, for example, saying really basic, direct things about what was wrong with the global response to climate, was very effective. So I'm very, very keen to encourage all levels of our community in whatever way they can to get engaged. Engagement's the most important thing. And that engagement concept carries right through. I mean, one of the problems we have with the Chinese is we haven't bothered to engage with them so long that we just haven't, our ministers can't pick up the phone and talk to them. Engagement's fundamental. And as part of that, you need representatives that reflect their community, have a capacity to contribute constructively to the national dialogue, the national debate on big issues.
Mm. All right.
Caitlin, can I ask a couple of questions? My name is Alan Gale. Two things. One is, does this group believe that Damien Drum is unpopular in this electorate? And the second question I ask relates to the mention that Cathy made about the Murray-Darling Basin water allocation. I'm a water engineer. The allocation for the Murray-Darling is immoral. It is so far below what it needs to be to provide environmental security. I'm hoping, Cathy, that was the point you were making. And here we have Damien Drum is trying to push that number down even lower because that will keep his farming electorate happy. Is he working for a farming electorate, or is he working for something much more?
Alan, just a quick answer to that, if I could, Caitlin. Two things. It's irrelevant what I think about the federal member, truly, and it's irrelevant probably what you think. What Voices for groups are trying to work out is there enough interest in the community to be actively engaged in giving a wider choice? And if there is enough interest, what would be the issues that people would galvanise behind? Now, when I mention the Murray-Darling Basin, it's just because I live in the catchment areas. I live on a farm, up just outside of Wodonga. And our water goes, I am acutely conscious of water politics. I follow it really closely. And I know how important it is on both sides of the border, but particularly in Nicholls and Farrer. And I just feel so sorry for those two members of parliament. Both Farrer is the environment minister, but she's a Liberal, and the National Party, how hard it is for them to absolutely represent their communities when they've got to go to Canberra because they're caught by the parties. So all I was really putting up to you, it's not about what I think, it's actually about creating discussion and conversation in the community, and then electing somebody who the community thinks is actually going to take their interests and not the party interests to the debate. So, and I think what we're talking about tonight, we're launching a process, and I know Rob's going to talk about the kitchen table conversation process will start, where people can get together and actually talk to each other about real political issues, not argue, not trying to convince people, but actually sit around in small groups and saying, well, what do you actually think about water? And part of the benefit of the kitchen table conversations is, in a way, you are doing it because you want to find out what people think. But the actual process of us listening to each other respectfully, as us being the change we want to see. And then rather than saying, okay, the government's got to solve the problem, what the peoples of Nicholls could do, and oh my God, it'd be wonderful if we crossed the border and went to Farah, and we as communities started to say, what do we want to do about our water, rather than constantly blaming the government because it doesn't work. So bringing the politics down to the really basic people who are influenced by it. So it's not really whether I agree or disagree, it's how do we have the conversation respectfully and we can listen to each other. And I know that that's what worked in Indi. And it began with our process. But the really surprising thing, Alan, it continued, and it continues now all over the place on almost any issue. Like we've got a big fight going on with the Australian Rail Track Corporation. And I know the people of Benalla and Euroa have got together and they're having kitchen table conversations about how they're going to manage that issue. So they're taking the process to a whole lot of issues. And I think that's what tonight's really about, is how do we make democracy real? And one by one, I think there's 96 of us listening, 98 of us listening today. And if we could start sitting down and talking to each other in a really respectful way, listening and hearing and thinking about the solution, like we would be in a better place. So I think that's what I'm encouraging you really to do, is not to criticize the member, but just say, well, let's take the opportunity to actually have the discussion around our tables.
Well, that might be a good time to jump to some of these questions. One interesting one, I think, is for Cathy. How did you get the young people in Indi engaged and involved?
Well, so the thing I know about young people is they don't come to kitchen table conversations and they don't want to go to meetings. But all of us have got them in our, if we're lucky, we've got them in our family, in our networks. So what we did is we started small with 5 or 10, and we said, what are your issues? And in my time, one of the issues was climate change. And we said, well, let's get organised about climate change. What do we want to see there? And what happened was that there was a group of young people at Wangaratta High School, and they said, okay, well, we're supporting you, Cathy. We don't want to go to any meetings. We don't really want to talk politics, but we'll make a 50-second, maybe it was a minute, TikTok type video. And they sent it around all their friends saying, we're supporting Cathy. We want you to do the same. And we're supporting her because she believes in climate change and she's going to take action. And so that TikTok video just went viral. And again, they didn't know me from a bar of soap, but they knew that I supported action on climate, that I supported better internet, that I wanted the train service improved, that I wanted more jobs in the country, that I wanted better education for young people. And so okay, well, that's 100% better than what we're currently getting. We'll vote for you. So that's how we did it. But I think in Shep, you've got a totally different, and Echuca and Seymour and Nagambie and Yarrawonga, you've got different demographics and you've got different communities. You're going to go and someone's going to have to go and talk to those young people and say, how do you want to be involved? And then you've got to listen to what they say, and you can't argue and say, oh, that's not going to work. You've actually got to go and do what they say. Or alternatively say, well, are you happy with what you've got? How would you like to be involved in this process? Maybe you'd get up a social media group, or maybe you could prepare some ads. But I want to say to you, for the people in Nicholls, you're already there. You've already got I think a fantastic independent. Now, whether or not you agree with Susanna Sheed on all the stuff she does, the fact that she has delivered so much to the Shepparton area, you're miles ahead than we were in Indi, because you've already had an experience of what an independent member of parliament's like. So you can build on that. And I think talking to your young people about how you can build on what they need will give you big results. But you've got to go and ask them in the first place. You can't expect them to come to you.
someone else is interested in talking about the media, it would be great to hear about the role of media and how this influences bad outcomes. I don't know, maybe you want to take that, John or Cathy?
I'll just have a quick thing to say first.
Hmm.
Again, I don't know, Northeast Victoria, here, we've got fantastic media. We've got locally owned newspapers.
Mm.
We've got community radio everywhere. We've got still got independently owned commercial radio. So the mainstream Murdoch press and The Age, like very, very few people read the Australian. People might read the Saturday Herald Sun. They all of us watched we watched local news, and I don't know how Shep's still going with local news, but we've still got some local news over here in Albury-Wodonga. So the media, we were so blessed in Northeast Victoria because our media was still local, and I know the Shep News is local. So we were able to get great debate happening because it wasn't controlled by Murdoch or the Costello family. So it's a different thing in the country, I think, to the city. And we had a really good response from the local media. Not to say they agreed with us, but they loved the fact that there was a real competition happening because it sold lots of their papers, and they were really pleased about that. And we bought advertising space in their papers, and the competition was real through the media and the TV.
Actually, on that, if you do find the right candidate, who funds he or she running against a major party with a close to endless budget must be hard.
So it wasn't actually hard. So just a quick thing about money. People said it was all going to be hard, but in fact it wasn't, because what we had on our webpage, please donate. And in that first election in 2013, when I ran, local people gave money, and they gave between $50 and $100. Like a few people gave $1,000. I think one of my uncles gave $1,000, or some of my extended family. But because there was so much involvement, lots of people put in little bits of money, that in the end we had $160,000, which was, a huge amount. And I know I heard later that my opponent, she put in $30,000 of her own money to the campaign because she couldn't get money out of the Liberal Party in Melbourne and Sydney. They didn't have enough, and they weren't going to worry about it. So she actually had to fund hers, whereas the community funded the Indi campaign. And I know in 2019, I think Helen Haynes, I think it was about $200,000 came from our community, because the community wanted this. So they were really prepared to put their money in. We didn't have big funders. We didn't have union or big business. It was your everyday mum and dad, your farmers, your small business people who wanted the choice, and they wanted something better, and they were prepared to back it. So in fact, fundraising was not difficult. I mean, you had to work at it, but so many people were prepared to fund me, to back me, and then to back Helen. Like, it got really embarrassing, because it's very humbling when your community, they vote for you, but they also give you their money. It's a very humbling and wonderful thing.
Mm. How do we narrow down to the issues that are relevant for a federal election and are a federal government's responsibility?
So you've got to ask people. But what we found is very few people actually understand the difference between local government, state government, and Commonwealth government. So, for example, the train line, Melbourne to Albury, just shocking. It wasn't local government, but it's a mixture of state and federal government. So we didn't argue and say that's only Commonwealth. And when I became the Member of Parliament, I worked really closely with the state government. And because health, it's all mixed up. So I think it's what John was saying before. You've actually got to listen to the local issues, and then not make the big argument, well, that's Commonwealth, or that's state, or that's federal. It's like, well, okay, I understand the complexity of this issue. If I get elected, I'll do my best to work with local government and state government and sort it out, which is what I spent all my time doing, was building partnerships, local, state, with the regional development, with the Regional Development Corporation. And I know Sue Benedicus here tonight, so she was chair at the time. With local governments, all came up to Canberra and put their views. So basically the division really was not an issue, because we all worked together as a community. And that's where our strength was, that local government, state government, and federal government issues got wrapped up together. And then my job was to plough our way through. But John, you might have a
The
comment.
Morrison government has been deliberately trying to confuse this difference between Commonwealth and state, for example. Commuter car parks, to my mind, were always a state responsibility, building near bus stops and train stations and so on. Yet the federal government decided it was an effective way to channel money to key marginal seats. Even if they didn't need a commuter car park, even if it was nowhere near a train station, it was just a way of channeling money. And it's a corrupt process. And the corruption process behind a lot of those allocations of grants has become a big issue to the average person. And just going back to the point you're making about money, I agree, Cathy, you don't need a lot of money. And Obama proved that in the US by raising a lot of his money and very small donations online. But we do need, on the other side, to get big money out of politics. The fact that there is a heavy reliance on big donors and then they're paid off with favourable government decision. I think we've got to clean up campaign funding, whether we limit it to individual donations and some find a way of blocking union donations, business donations, institutional donations. I don't know. It needs to be real-time information. People need to know who's donating on the day, not wait 18 months to find out who funded the last election. I mean, this is a big issue that people are starting to understand the significance of it. Just noticed the other day in the media, there was a renewal of the contract for Nauru, the administration of Nauru, the refugee, 108 of them at Nauru. This is a staggering allocation of money to a major donor of the Liberal Party without any contest at all. No tender, no nothing, just a renewed contract. And the blowout in that cost over the years that we've had Nauru is staggering. And these things slip by, but people are starting to see them and understand the significance of them. And I think rorts, misallocation of money, wasting money when and showing priorities that are different, flying Matthias Cormann around to win a job when the people are struggling to keep their jobs in Australia, that grates really significantly. So I think there are a lot of these issues that are going to come through to the fore through the process of engagement from the kitchen table, if you like, right through to the national debate.
Mm.
I'm going to jump in there. I'd like to thank the questions that are coming through. Pause those for a minute. I just wanted to elaborate on a couple of points, and we have set an 8:30 limit for tonight, but I've got something to mention about that in just a moment. Firstly, Cathy and John, thank you so much for sharing your views and your insights with us tonight, and Catilin for your in-depth interview. That was fantastic. One of the points of difference between our Voices for Nicholls group and some of the others is that we're not actively looking for an independent. So our reason for that is we want to ensure that our local representative represents our community. And that's the most important thing for us. And if we are to achieve this, we as a community need to hold them to account. And this group will do that. That's what we've set up our Voices for Nicholls for. If we're selecting our own candidate to run, then some would see this as a conflict. Would we go easy on them? Would we get special treatment from them once they were elected? That conflict would undermine the integrity that we want to see in politics and which we want to model. I've got a couple other points just to make, and we're going to throw open possibly some more questions. Where to next for Voices for Nicholls? Well, we're excited to let you know that we're ready to start the kitchen table conversations, and we'd love for you all to get involved by either joining in or hosting a conversation of your own. You can sign up for this through our website. We have Gabby Chan, journalist and author of Rusted Off, Why Country Australia is Fed Up, lined up to speak to us at our next Zoom meeting on October the 10th. There will be an option to sign up to attend this on our website again soon. If you have any ideas for issues that you'd like more information about or ideas for guest speakers, please email us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you feel inspired by tonight's discussion and you'd like to get involved with the Voices for Nicholls committee, or you think you've got some great skills that we could use, we're always after volunteers. Please email us if you'd like to help. And finally, the last thing you can do is just help spread the word about who we are and what we're about. So please tell your friends, your family, and your colleagues. Please keep an eye on our Facebook and website, because we're going to publish our events and opportunities there. Add them to your favourites so you don't lose them. And I'd also like to invite you now, if you'd like, to stick around. We've asked Cathy and John if they would like to take some more questions. They obviously have their own evenings that they have to retire to, but we're going to stop recording. And so if perhaps you'd like to put some more questions in the chat. We know that there was far more there than we anticipated for the 10 minutes. So we'll stop the recording now. Cathy and John, if you're happy to stick around, we'd love to have you stay, but we also understand if you've got to